There was a day that I read they shot down the Ukrainians shot down. I think it was 2 jets and 3. I think it was 2 or 3 helicopters. It was a Ka-52, which is like their most advanced, kind of like Apache type of helicopter, attack helicopter, and another Mi-8, or I don't know what those other weird looking Russian helicopters. I think it's like a transport helicopter, and so they shot like 5 Russian aircraft down in a matter of minutes when they turned the system on, and then the Russians realized, holy shit, they've got something that just took everybody out of the sky like that.
Have the Russians had any success with their helicopters in the campaign?
Well,
using attack helicopters against the Ukrainians?
when the Ukrainians first started going, doing the counteroffensive, they had that very famous photo with all that, a bunch of wrecked or damaged Bradleys, some Leopard tanks, some several of the mine clearing type of equipment. There was like 4 or 5 of those that had all gotten blown up, and they just, because what would happen is they're trying to get through the minefield, and then the attack helicopters came up, and they just didn't have enough short range air defense because the attack helicopters were able to stay far enough outside their short range air defense that they could just basically pick them off.
Wow.
And so
and they did.
Yeah, they lost a lot. Well, a lot of the guys survived because they were in Bradleys, they were in Western gear.
So they didn't get a lot. They didn't kill a lot of people. Just maybe destroyed the equipment.
Well, I mean, there was a bunch that got killed when they were trying to get through the minefields, and the losses were too big, and they had to back off and be more methodical and do more attrition, and just slowly, when they could find Russian air defenses, take it out with a HIMARS or drones in some cases. And I've been seeing them using HIMARS on those. The Russians have, I guess it's like vans, those little Scooby-Doo style vans that they have for the Lancet drones, I guess they call it. They're like 4 X's as wings. They're really weird looking, but they're they've got an armor piercing type of shell in the front that can take out
loitering munition.
Yeah, well, it flies around. I can't remember how long it can stay in the air for, but I saw they had a drone that was watching and figured out where the Russians were, this crew that launches these things, and they called in a HIMARS strike, and I think it was the one with tungsten pellets that to just perforate everything, the engine block, the metal. That's a nasty weapon. Nobody survives that. The equipment is destroyed. It's not
well, you
fixable.
are talking Russian equipment, though.
Yeah, this is Russian air defenses, or it could be, well, in this case, it was a Scooby-Doo van, and you killed the guys that were launching the Lancet drones that are able to successfully take out even the Western gear that we've sent them.
Yeah. Wow. Damn.
So it's been interesting to watch the innovation. And then, like we talked about the other day, Avdiivka, that the Ukrainians kind of did a strategic retreat. And then, because the Russian doctrine is to basically always be attacking and trying to, always be on the offense and trying to move forward. And so they kind of follow that doctrine, and they're using it against them in that area.
They're taking a lot of losses, though.
Yeah, it's like some days they're taking like 900, 1,000 killed in action.
And they're acceptable with those losses?
The Russians treat their people like disposable drones. That's part, what's interesting is you see some of the, it's not a lot of the bougie Russians are going to the front lines. It's all these other republics and undesirable people that aren't really, ethnically favorable to the Russians. And just seeing the cemeteries with all the people that get killed from their areas, seeing pictures of the Russian monuments in these cities from Afghanistan versus the ones from Ukraine, and the ones from Ukraine are just like, they're giant because there's so many people, and in a lot of cases the families don't even know what's happened to their people. They don't know what's happened to their sons or their fathers.
All they know is they didn't come back.
Yeah, they didn't come back, and they're the Russian government. Oftentimes they don't know, and oftentimes it seems like corruption. They don't want to tell them. Because then people, and so how part of the people in the West are figuring out what the Russian losses are is there's some things that the Russian government publishes, like how much they've paid out in death benefits to people that have been killed in the war. And so, because it's a fixed payment for each family, for each person that dies. And so you can just divide the fixed payment into the total amount, and you can figure out exactly how many people have been killed. Plus, they're looking at the social media, because then you see the death notices from the family on their social media, and so they can get count losses that way.
Yeah, you can audit it in a way.
And there's dudes out there on Twitter that, they might have a full-time job doing something else, and they, a lot of these guys used to do this when they were in the military. And so that's just their wheelhouse. And to them, it's fun, and it's like they'll sit there all night, pissing their wife off or their girlfriend, going through Telegram and counting, downloading all the latest videos of the day of the losses, whether it's Russian or Ukrainian, and then putting the spreadsheet, the Excel spreadsheet, out on Twitter for people to see.
It's wild, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's like the collective consciousness is just putting all the information out there, because there's people, geeking out all over the world over this stuff.
But the Russians have lost a lot of people.
It's like over 300,000 people. I mean, all you have to do is watch Prigozhin's videos where he talks about, it's on camera, and he says, we've lost 3 to 4 times what the government is saying. And so the Russian government has acknowledged their losses, and if you take that number times what Prigozhin said, is like, it lines up with exactly what the Ukrainians have said the Russians have lost.
Do you know how many the Ukrainians have lost?
I hear estimates like they're saying probably 70 to 80% of what the Russians have lost. I've seen some of those. It might be. I don't know. They don't release those figures, but that's what people, because it's hard to figure that out. I mean, it's smart operational security to keep those losses, but that's what I've heard. But I mean, there were times during the siege of Bakhmut where the Russians were losing like 10-1, 18-1 on some days, and
that's what I was curious about. The ratio.
But that was a lot of the meat assaults where they were just sending these prisoners, so the Ukrainians would fire on them so they could figure out where they were to shoot back at them.
Wow, man,
so,
that was a really nasty battle in Bakhmut city.
Yeah, there's nothing left of it. It's just totally destroyed. It's just hulks of.
It's like Stalingrad.
Yeah, exactly.
Destroyed.
Looks like Stalingrad. There's all the infrastructure, everything's totally destroyed. So even after the war, you're going to have to, demine it and look for explosives and booby traps, because the Russians, whenever they evacuate, they leave a bunch of booby traps for the Ukrainians. And so the families can't go back into their wrecked houses because there might be a bomb in their dollhouse, basically. So a little girl goes to play with a dollhouse and, gets blown up. And that's what their future is, even after the war.
They're going to have to be really careful with everything in that city. They're going to have to really watch out.
I mean, in Germany, they still, it seems like just about every other year, they find an unexploded, 500 or 1,000-pound bomb or whatever. It's some of the biggest bombs for World War II that hit and went into the ground and never exploded. And so when they're digging a foundation for something, they hit metal and they realize, oh shit, it's a giant ass bomb.
How the hell do you get that out there?
Yeah,
Carefully, huh?
Well, they usually what they do is everybody backs up out of the way and they put a charge on it and blow it in place because it's it's been underground and rusting and corroding, and the explosive is going to be typically unstable at that point. So if you move it around, it might blow
it up.
Yeah,
that's probably the best thing to do. Yeah. Get it out of here. Wow, that's scary. And to think how Bakhmut is going to be. And they probably still haven't recovered all the bodies, equipment.
Yeah. And a lot of times the Russians
dead civilians that are probably got left behind. I mean, it's probably still a graveyard right now,
I remember seeing video of Mosul, and it's just all the dead jihadis, their legs sticking out of the buildings, partially or mostly rotted, just dangling in the wind, and just pieces of humans just fucking everywhere in the rubble. And I mean, it's totally destroyed, and they killed all the bad guys, but they basically had to destroy most of Mosul to retake it.
Yeah, it's like kind of weird idea, like being king of the ashes. Like what do you really
your
accomplishing?
Empire of dirt,
right?
What like a Johnny Cash song.
Yeah, what are you accomplishing really? I mean, what have you gained? All you've really made is somebody else lose something. You didn't really ever gain anything. If you just view taking something from someone else as being worth the losses, I guess it's up for them to decide if it's worth it for them. But it just seems like a waste of life to me. It really does.
It's a tragedy of epic proportions.
Yeah. Some heavy stuff, man. Been a really rough war for them.
It's tough to watch that because there's so much gore on Twitter, but it's like if you want to see what happens and kind of understand it, and it's like you're gonna get exposed to that shit.
How much longer you think it's gonna be going on?
I don't know. Like we were talking about earlier, it just seems like Joe Biden is slow rolling the ammunition and the stuff that they need, whether it's the F-16s. They just didn't. They were supposed to have that new glide bomb that was would go in the HIMARS tubes or the HIMARS launchers that gets like double the range, and we were so the contract, I don't know, Boeing or somebody I think makes those. They're ready. They're ready to deploy them, and they're good to go. We're ready to send them to Ukraine. They were supposed to be in Ukraine by December, and the Pentagon goes, we want to test it for a little while longer, and so now it's January, February. It's like they fucking need them now.
For sure.
It's like you're. So I look at stupid shit like that. It's the contractor came through and got it done early, and it's ready to be deployed on the front lines, and they need it. And they don't get it. This just means more Ukrainians dead, more Russians dead. And I look at that and it just seems like they want to kill as many Ukrainian and Russian men as possible. Just let them bleed each other out as long as they can. Give the Ukrainians enough to keep them from losing, but not enough to win decisively. And it's, because you see it, you read in the press, and Zelensky's, he's done a great job being a wartime president for his country, and he's just constantly, in essence, fundraising and, asking for material and help, and he's getting a lot of it, but there's a lot of things that they should have. I've been reading that we've got always like 1,000, 1,500 old Bradleys that we could send over there that we're paying $40,000, $50,000, I think, a piece to basically demilitarize and then scrap them and sell the metal. It's like, that's fucking stupid.
Yeah.
And we're just destroying these things, which we should be keeping in the first place. And they could really use them because when they need to evac people out, one of the first things they send in is a Bradley. Those are saving a lot of lives over there, a lot of Ukrainian lives. And like you were talking about, they're being very methodical. They're just trying to slowly attrit because they can't get the stuff that they really need to really go full out at the Russians to break through the lines. So they're just trying to slowly pick off every piece of air defense. I've seen some of the air defenses that the Russians have that are painted in like winter type of camouflage showing up in Crimea, and obviously that means that they're taking air defenses from other places because they're getting destroyed. They're getting slow.
I would impart a little advice on the Bradley, something that happened to some of our guys over there. There's some pretty deep canals all around Baghdad and everything like that, and they usually have a lot of water in the bottom of them and everything. May not be 3 or 4, maybe 5 foot of water in some places. Deep enough, right, to cause trouble. And they had a Bradley flipped over upside down in one of those. It lost its, I guess it just flipped over one way or the other. I guess they, got it off in the ditch somehow, and it turned upside down, and wound up filling it full of water, and the whole crew drowned. Inside that Bradley. So they don't take well to water. It's some advice I would impart on the Ukrainians. Just make sure you don't flip those things over in a canal somewhere because they don't take too well to water. And they're hard, and apparently they're impossible to get out of, and they don't have good escape hatches or something, I guess is what happened to these guys. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of crazy footage. There was a Bradley had come to evacuate a soldier. I think he had probably stepped on a mine or something like that. And you could tell there were craters all over the place. And so the Bradley backed up, and the door went down, and he steps to jump in, I guess, a crater that's already blown up because there's got to be nothing there, right? Steps in it. As soon as his foot goes down, explodes. So he kind of lands on his his shin, and the explosive goes off. And so obviously he can't get to the wounded guy that's with another dude that he's trying to help. Now he's got to crawl back into the Bradley, and his what's left of his lower leg is all mangled and being drugged behind them, and you see the blood trail and into the vehicle, and it's brutal. And there's a drone watching above. I don't know if it's a Ukrainian drone or a Russian drone that filmed it or whatever. Then I've seen other ones where the guys back up and they're bringing wounded in. I've watched the Ukrainians do it to the Russians. I've watched the Russians do it to the Ukrainians in this particular case, where they're bringing a wounded guy in, and you know the back is down, and then a drone flies right in, you know, and kills all of them. And it's just such a brutal war.
Probably worse than World War II in some ways.
Well, they're because the Russians have you know effective air defenses. They got the attack helicopters they're worrying about. They can't do any big armored offensive because they get hit with artillery, and so they go in, drive around with Humvees or Bradleys and small assault groups. And after they bombed the trenches where the Russians are and the tree lines, then they just go up close and personal through the trenches, trying to catch the Russians off guard and kill them. And sometimes the trenches are booby trapped, so you go in thinking you're going to get to the Russians, and instead there's a tripwire or whatever, and you get blown up. It's just like, it's so nasty. It's like up close and personal.
Mm-hmm. I've watched a lot of footage. It's pretty damn brutal for sure.
Where they got the beachhead, because the Russians are complaining they can't get any counter battery fire. It's the Ukrainians are because they brought up artillery now, and so they're able to hit the Russians. And so with the electronic warfare and the air defense that they've got, it's like the Russians try to hit them, and they just can't. They're outranged with the Western artillery outranges what they have. So because they've had to back all their artillery and stuff up, and so they're slowly moving in. And it's like that's an area because of the river that the Russians didn't have huge minefields, and there's not a lot of defenses that the Russian defenses are really thin in that area because they'd never expected them to come through. But when they blew the dam, and a lot of places it washed all their minefields away too, and so they have a bunch of equipment that is good for getting across like swampy areas.
Plus, just wait till all people start finding the mines in the river downstream.
Yeah,
years from now.
Yeah,
we have to clean all that up.
So they're talking about because they only I don't know, I guess they have a limited number of the pontoon bridges. And so they don't want to bring those up and build them and then have the Russians blow them up because they don't have any more. Yeah. And but to bring in the armor and stuff they want, I've been reading that they said they need like 5 of them in place to be able to bring everything forward they need, plus to be able to continue to supply a force that big so they can make their way through the Russian rear and cut them off completely, cut off all the rails, cut off all the roads, and get to the Sea of Azov. And the whole southern Russia is like they're cut off, and then when they get to the Sea of Azov, then they can take out the Kerch Bridge. And so the only way they're completely cut off.
They can cut them off,
and they only have like supposedly 3 or 4 days of ammunition. The Russians do, and it's like, so you're getting no food, you're getting no medical evacuation, you're getting no more ammunition, and you're getting no more fuel. So you're within a few days, all your vehicles are bricked.
I bet the troops down there are on edge. Those guys that are left, the Russians, I bet they feel like they're about to get hemmed up.
I think there's like 70 to 80,000 of them in the south, isn't there? Is that how many Russians are deployed down there?
Those guys are going to get their asses handed to them. That's going to be a fucking bloodbath.
But, all war is deception, so maybe the appearance of slow rolling of because oftentimes when the Americans say, okay, now we're sending these things, they've already had it for weeks. It was like the HIMARS. Oh, we're going to send 5, and then when you look at the numbers of crews that were trained, because that was published, you're like, that's like 55 vehicles, and then 6 months later you find out that they already got 50 of those systems, and you're like, ah. So supposedly we're sending them old generation F-16 jets, and their radar has less of a range than the Russians have in their most advanced fighters. I'm thinking, well, that's kind of fucking stupid. You're asking for them to get shot down basically because the Russians can see them before they can see the Russians, unless they're having modifications or. I mean, the smart
Surely they have better radar for them.
the smart thing to do is to send our most advanced, or give them a handful of our most advanced F-16s and see what the
Rack
fuck
up
they
some
can do.
kills.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because we got a
rack
new
up
one
some
that
kills.
just rolled out, and they've got all these new electronic warfare and jamming pods and stuff like that. It's like, let's see if it works. I've seen Russian channels, bloggers, complaining that the West is sending all of their latest weapons to basically test them on them, to test killing them better and more efficiently, and it's very upsetting and demoralizing to them, obviously.